more than a decade. Inside the monarchy, that kind of absence is rarely meaningless. Royal jewelry is selected with extraordinary care. A necklace can honor a relative. A brooch can carry a diplomatic message. A tiara can signal rank, bloodline, forgiveness, or power. What a royal woman wears may speak more loudly than anything she says, and what she refuses to wear can speak even louder. The unnamed tiara belonged to a different chapter of Anne's life. It appeared when she was still seen primarily as the Queen's strong-willed daughter, sharp, confident, and determined to define herself inside a family built on tradition. In those years, the jewel seemed to celebrate her place near the heart of the monarchy. It carried youth, status, and the quiet approval of a mother who expected her daughter to remain strong. Then, without explanation, it vanished. Palace whispers insist the tiara was not lost. It was not damaged, sold, or permanently handed to another royal woman. It allegedly remains protected inside a controlled collection, carefully recorded and fully available. Yet whenever attendants prepared jewels for Anne, that case stayed closed. At first, the pattern could have been dismissed as coincidence. But years passed. State dinners came and went. Family anniversaries were marked. Formal events offered perfect opportunities for its return. Still, Anne chose other pieces, smaller jewels, or sometimes no tiara at all. Those around her reportedly began to understand that this was not forgetfulness. It was a decision. Anne has never been sentimental in public, and she rarely explains herself. That makes her silence more unsettling. She has not rejected the tiara openly. She has not questioned its importance. She simply behaves as though it no longer has a place in her life. And that raises a darker possibility. Perhaps the jewel is tied to a promise, a disagreement, or a wound involving the late Queen. Perhaps opening its case does not remind Anne of diamonds, ceremony, or privilege. Perhaps it reminds her of a conversation she has spent 10 years trying to bury. To understand why a princess would abandon a jewel created to celebrate her place in the monarchy, the story must return to the years when Anne first wore it, and to the family tensions already forming beneath its glittering surface. When Anne first wore the tiara, it appeared to confirm everything the palace wanted Britain to believe: a proud queen, a fearless daughter, and a monarchy passing securely into the future. But behind the diamonds was an expectation Anne may never have willingly accepted. The tiara was not delicate in the way some royal jewels were designed to be. It did not exist to make Anne appear softer, more romantic, or easier to admire. Its shape was elegant, but its presence was firm. It seemed made for a woman who stood straight, spoke plainly, and rarely asked permission to be taken seriously. On Anne, it did not look like decoration. It looked like authority. That was exactly why the Queen valued it. For Elizabeth, the jewel reportedly represented far more than beauty. It reflected the qualities she respected most in her daughter: discipline, endurance, loyalty, and the ability to carry responsibility without complaint. Unlike tiaras linked to weddings, courtship, or public affection, this one was tied to service. It carried the quiet message that Anne was not simply the Queen's daughter. She was one of the people expected to hold the monarchy together when others failed. Anne understood that message immediately. She had never depended on jewels to prove her worth. She knew what they meant, but she resisted becoming trapped by them. While royal women were often judged by gowns, diamonds, and ceremony, Anne built her reputation through work. She preferred action over display. Yet refusing the tiara in those early years would have meant refusing something deeply personal from her mother, and the Queen's pride came with a hidden weight. Elizabeth admired Anne because she was reliable. But reliability inside the royal family could become a burden disguised as praise. Anne was expected to remain steady, avoid public rebellion, protect the institution, and absorb pressures that others could not carry. The more dependable she became, the more the family leaned on her. At the first major occasion when she wore the tiara, the moment looked warm and triumphant. To the public, it was a mother honoring a daughter. But insiders later claimed the jewel had been connected to a serious private conversation about Anne's future role. There may have been no legal document, no official condition, and no public declaration. Only an understanding. The tiara would remain available to Anne as long as she stood for unity, continuity, and unquestioned duty. At first, she accepted that meaning out of love. She respected her mother and understood the sacrifices required by the crown. But over time, the jewel may have begun to feel less like affection and more like a contract she had never freely signed. That tension remained hidden until the tiara's final appearances, which came near a period of private debate over inheritance, access to royal vaults, and which women would control the monarchy's most emotionally powerful jewels. The tiara's disappearance did not begin with a public scandal. It began quietly, behind locked doors, when Anne was reportedly shown a document that changed the meaning of the jewel and forced her to choose between obedience and conscience. According to Palace Whispers, the turning point came during a private review of royal jewels that was never listed in any public schedule. Anne entered expecting a routine discussion about access and inheritance. She allegedly left knowing one tiara carried a condition she could no longer ignore. The meeting was said to have taken place in a secure palace room known only to a small circle of trusted officials. This was not a glittering treasure chamber built to impress visitors. It was colder than that. Detailed inventories filled locked cabinets. Sealed cases held objects tied to weddings, funerals, betrayals, and reigns long gone. Old letters sat beside ownership records, while every key, signature, and movement was carefully controlled. Royal jewels may appear to belong to one endless collection, but the truth is far more complicated. Some pieces are personal property. Others belong to the crown. Certain jewels are loaned, inherited, restricted, or quietly reserved. A marriage, death, change of rank, or shift in succession can completely alter who may wear them. Anne had been invited because she occupied a position few others could understand. She was the Queen's only daughter, one of the hardest-working members of the family, and a keeper of private history that younger royals had never been trusted to hear. She knew which jewels carried joy. She also knew which ones carried wounds. Then, the tiara's file was opened. Attached to it, insiders claimed, was a disputed inheritance note. The wording did more than explain where the jewel belonged. It connected the piece to a future royal woman whose eventual rise remained deeply sensitive inside the family. Anne allegedly understood the implication at once. The tiara was no longer simply part of her mother's trust. It was being positioned as a symbol of acceptance. She is said to have questioned whether an intimate heirloom was being used to reward silence, soften opposition, or legitimize a change that some relatives had never fully embraced. The advisors reportedly saw nothing improper. To them, royal jewels had always served a strategic purpose. Placed on the right woman at the right event, a tiara could declare unity without a single public statement. But Anne saw the danger. She believed certain objects carried emotional boundaries. To transfer or wear them under false circumstances could rewrite the past, erase pain, and suggest forgiveness where none had truly been given. A senior palace figure allegedly reminded her that royal jewels belonged to the story of the crown, not to the private feelings of one person. Anne said little, but the argument cut deeply. She understood duty better than almost anyone. Yet she also understood how institutions could use ceremony to bury uncomfortable truths. The tiara that once represented her mother's confidence now seemed like a tool in a larger plan. Before the meeting ended, Anne reportedly asked one direct question. If she wore the tiara again, would that appearance be interpreted as support for the proposed future arrangement? The answer was careful, but clear. Yes, That answer is the reason insiders believe the tiara has remained untouched for a decade, and why Anne's silence may represent one of the longest acts of resistance ever carried out inside the modern royal family. Insiders suspect Anne stopped wearing the tiara after learning it would eventually be used to legitimize another royal woman's rise. Every time Anne wore it, she would strengthen that future claim. Her answer was not a confrontation, a leak, or a public refusal. She simply never touched it again. That, according to those familiar with the dispute, is the real reason the jewel disappeared. Anne allegedly discovered that the tiara was being considered for a future transfer, long-term loan, or symbolic presentation to a royal woman whose growing position remained emotionally divisive inside the family. The plan was subtle. No dramatic announcement would be needed. One carefully chosen appearance could make the change look natural, accepted, and complete. But Anne understood what that appearance would say. Her objection was not simple jealousy, nor was it a battle over who deserved the brightest diamonds. To Anne, the tiara carried the memory of her mother's trust. It had represented service, strength, and the private bond between a queen and the daughter she believed would never abandon duty. Handing it to someone else for political effect would not merely change its wearer. It would change its history. The palace strategy depended on keeping the jewel active. If Anne continued wearing it at important ceremonies, it would remain part of the living royal collection rather than becoming closely tied to her alone. Then, when the time came, another woman could appear in it, and the transition might be presented as continuity instead of replacement. Anne's refusal destroyed that plan. By leaving the tiara untouched, she allowed its public identity to fade. Each year of silence made it more personal, more mysterious, and more difficult to transfer without explanation. Any sudden reappearance would raise questions. Why had Anne abandoned it? Who had authorized its return? What private agreement had changed? She needed no legal battle, no public statement, no group of supporters. Her absence became the obstacle. Insiders believe Anne knew wearing the tiara again would be interpreted as approval of a future she had not accepted in her heart. She could remain loyal to the crown, attend every engagement, and stand beside her family in public. But she would not allow one jewel to speak falsely on her behalf. The dispute allegedly reached the Queen herself. Anne is said to have asked whether she was being directly ordered to wear it. Elizabeth did not give that command. She understood her daughter too well. Forcing Anne would not create unity. It would turn quiet resistance into an open family rupture. That moment exposed a painful divide between them. The Queen had spent her life protecting continuity. Anne had spent hers serving it. Yet service did not always mean surrendering judgment, especially when memory, loyalty, and personal conscience were at stake. So an unspoken agreement reportedly formed. The tiara would remain secured. Anne would not discuss the proposed transfer. The palace would not publicly question its disappearance. For a time, the arrangement held. Some officials believed Anne would soften. They expected grief, age, or changing family roles to weaken her position. Instead, every passing year made the refusal more deliberate. The tiara became harder to move, more dangerous to reveal, and more closely tied to a secret no one wanted examined. Anne had not stopped the transfer forever. She had only delayed it, holding the jewel between two possible futures until the authority above her changed. For years, the Queen's presence kept that fragile arrangement intact. But after her death, old understandings lost their protector. New authority entered the vault, and Anne's silent refusal was suddenly placed under pressure. When Queen Elizabeth II died, the monarchy mourned a sovereign, but inside the palace, another process began almost immediately. Keys changed hands. Private instructions were reviewed. Jewel inventories were reopened. And the tiara Anne had avoided for years was suddenly part of a new reign's unfinished business. For Anne, the loss was far deeper than ceremony could express. She had not only lost her mother, she had lost the one person who understood what the tiara had once meant, why it had become dangerous, and how their silent compromise had kept a larger conflict from breaking into the open. As long as the Queen lived, the jewel remained protected by an understanding no official document could fully explain. After her death, that protection vanished. Royal mourning may be emotional, but the monarchy is also an institution, and institutions continue moving even through grief. Historic objects must be examined. Records must be reviewed. Ownership, access, and future use must be clarified. Private memories become entries in inventories, and deeply personal heirlooms are judged according to what role they can still serve. That was where the tiara became a problem. It had never been formally retired. It had not been permanently gifted to Anne, nor publicly promised to another woman. It remained suspended between personal meaning and crown control. For more than a decade, nobody had forced a decision. Now the new household wanted order. There was growing pressure to simplify access to the royal collection and return dormant pieces to ceremonial life. From the palace's point of view, a locked tiara served no public purpose. It could not project continuity, strengthen a royal image, or create the appearance of unity while hidden in darkness. Anne was reportedly approached about wearing it at a major event intended to honor the late Queen and demonstrate stability under the new reign. The request sounded respectful, almost tender, yet Anne allegedly recognized what lay beneath it. One appearance would change everything. If she wore the tiara as a tribute to her mother, its disappearance would be forgotten. The jewel would return to public memory as a symbol of mourning, loyalty, and continuity. Later, when it appeared on another royal woman, the transfer could be presented as natural rather than controversial. Anne resisted carefully. She did not accuse anyone. She reportedly mentioned comfort, practicality, styling, or personal preference. She understood that deeper explanations could be repeated, recorded, or turned against her. But the refusal carried its own pain. Part of her may have wanted to wear the tiara one final time for her mother. It held memories no other jewel could replace, yet that tribute would also reopen the path she had spent years blocking. The palace underestimated the weight of that choice. Advisors saw an object. Anne saw a final conversation with a woman who could no longer confirm what she had intended. Insiders later claimed the case had already been inspected and prepared. Someone expected the tiara to return, but when the event arrived, Anne appeared wearing another jewel. To the public, it meant nothing. Inside the palace, it meant everything. Her mother was no longer there to protect the compromise. Her silence could now be seen not as grief, but as resistance to the new direction of the crown. That second refusal changed the atmosphere. What had once been treated as Anne's private choice began to look like a challenge, and someone inside the palace reportedly decided the tiara could no longer remain under her silent control. Anne had never claimed legal ownership of the tiara, but for years her silence had controlled its fate. Then palace officials allegedly explored a new solution. Stop asking for her cooperation. If the jewel could be reassigned without her approval, her decade of resistance would end overnight. The problem was that royal possession and royal ownership were never the same thing. Anne may not have held the legal right to decide the tiara's future, yet decades of public appearances had tied the jewel to her name. To the public, it was part of her royal identity. To Anne, it may have carried something even stronger, the memory of her mother's trust and the private understanding that had kept the piece out of political use. That made the next move both simple and dangerous. According to palace whispers, officials considered reclassifying the tiara as an active crown jewel available for reassignment. On paper, the process could appear routine. Nothing would be seized. Nothing would be publicly taken from Anne. The records would simply show that the piece was available for another wearer. But royal symbolism does not obey paperwork so easily. The first appearance on another woman would immediately invite questions. Why had Anne stopped wearing it? Why had the jewel remained unseen for so long? Had a family dispute been hidden behind palace silence? Officials allegedly began studying old photographs, banquet records, and event histories to measure how strongly the tiara was still associated with Anne. They were not merely examining diamonds. They were calculating the cost of overriding her. Anne reportedly discovered the proposal indirectly. Perhaps through a revised inventory. Perhaps through a careful question from an attendant. Or perhaps when the tiara was suddenly missing from a selection of jewels that would once have included it. Her response was controlled, but unmistakable. She did not demand possession. She did not accuse anyone of theft. She asked only whether the late Queen's personal understanding would still be respected. The reply, insiders claimed, was cold. Private agreements did not automatically bind a new reign. That answer exposed the brutal truth beneath the ceremony. Anne's loyalty to her mother could now be treated as obstruction. A promise, once honored through silence, could be dismissed as sentiment standing in the way of institutional need. Yet Anne's resistance had never been about keeping diamonds for herself. She would rather see the tiara remain locked away forever than watch it used to create a false picture of forgiveness and family unity. Inside the palace, opinion reportedly divided. Some admired her consistency. Others believed no single royal should be allowed to freeze a valuable symbol because of unresolved emotion. Then another senior figure allegedly intervened, warning that forcing the transfer could create a scandal far greater than any ceremonial benefit the jewel might bring. The proposal was suspended. But it was not abandoned. A major royal occasion was approaching, and the monarchy needed powerful signs of unity. Once again, the tiara appeared on the list of possibilities. The next battle would not occur inside an inventory room. It would unfold around a major royal occasion where every jewel carried a message and where the tiara's unexpected return could rewrite the family hierarchy in a single night. The palace could hide private arguments, sealed inventories, and whispered inheritance plans, but it could not hide a tiara beneath the lights of a state occasion. Insiders feared that one carefully staged appearance would reveal the transfer, expose Anne's resistance, and force the family's secret conflict into public view. The opportunity came with a major royal gathering, the kind of evening built around diplomacy, tradition, and carefully controlled appearances. Every detail mattered. Seating plans carried rank. Speeches carried policy. Jewels carried messages. Royal watchers around the world would study every piece, searching for signs of favor, continuity, and shifting power. For the palace, it was the perfect moment to bring the tiara back. The event was large enough to bury uncomfortable questions beneath ceremony. Its return could be described as a tribute to the late Queen, a celebration of shared heritage, or a simple choice from the royal collection. One official explanation might be enough to make a controversial transfer appear natural. Behind the scenes, several tiaras were reportedly reviewed, cleaned, fitted, and matched with formal clothing. But one guarded case received unusual attention. The jewel Anne had refused for years was no longer being treated as dormant. It was being prepared as a possibility. Then Anne learned who might wear it. The discovery placed her in an impossible position. If she objected directly, she would confirm that a private dispute existed. If she remained silent, she could watch the tiara's meaning change in a single night. For decades, Anne had survived royal life by saying less than others expected. She did not complain. She did not explain. She carried duty without demanding sympathy. But now, that discipline had become a trap. She could not publicly defend the jewel without exposing the very secret she had promised to contain. There was one way to block the transfer. Anne could wear the tiara herself, Doing so would restore its connection to her and make an immediate reassignment far more difficult. But that choice carried its own defeat. After 10 years of refusal, wearing it again would support the palace's plan to return the piece to active use. It would protect the jewel from one outcome while surrendering to another. Wear it, and she helped revive the strategy. Refuse it, and someone else might claim it forever. Insiders claim a private warning was sent to the new household. If the tiara appeared without the late queen's full intentions being respected, people who knew its history might begin speaking. That threat was dangerous because the truth did not exist in only one file. It lived in the memories of retired dressers, attendants, family friends, and staff members who had watched Anne reject the jewel again and again. The palace now had to calculate more than symbolism. It had to calculate the risk of a leak. When the night arrived, attention fixed on the royal women. Every jewel became evidence. Every arrival seemed capable of settling the mystery. But the tiara never appeared. Another piece had been selected at the final moment. Whether Anne's warning succeeded, a senior royal intervened, or officials simply lost their nerve remained unclear. Yet the decision revealed something important. Anne's position still carried enough force to change a carefully planned ceremonial message. The tiara remained hidden, but the struggle had reached a point where silence could no longer solve it. The final question was no longer who would wear the jewel next, it was what Anne intended to do with the truth she had protected for 10 years. For a decade, Anne's refusal kept the tiara frozen between two reigns, two interpretations, and two versions of royal loyalty. But she cannot protect its meaning forever. One day the case will open again, and when it does, her silence may finally become more dangerous than the truth. Anne's decision was never about possession. She did not keep the tiara hidden because she wanted to claim its diamonds, deny them to another woman, or hold power over the royal collection. Her refusal was an act of preservation. She believed the jewel's original meaning was being reshaped, and leaving it untouched became the only way to stop that change. But such resistance carried a private cost. Every formal occasion brought the memory back. Every jewel selected in its place reminded Anne of the disagreement, her mother's careful silence, and the painful moment when family affection became mixed with palace strategy. What had once represented trust now carried the weight of an unresolved choice. The public saw none of this. Anne received no praise for her stand, no sympathy for the burden, and no recognition for what she may have sacrificed. She could not explain herself without exposing the monarchy she had spent her life protecting. Her greatest strength became her deepest isolation. Now the tiara appears to face three possible futures. Anne could wear it once more as a final tribute to the Queen, reclaiming its meaning before anyone else can change it. She could allow a transfer under strict conditions, ensuring that its history is acknowledged rather than erased. Or she could keep it locked away until another generation inherits the problem. Yet insiders suspect Anne may have prepared for a more dangerous outcome. There are whispers of a private record containing the Queen's original intentions, perhaps letters, personal notes, or testimony held back, for one specific reason. If the tiara is reassigned in a way Anne believes betrays that understanding, the record could be released. That possibility troubles the palace, because Anne is not easily dismissed. She has spent decades building a reputation for discipline, service, and blunt honesty. If she ever challenged an official explanation, the public might trust her version over the institution's carefully chosen words. Still, revenge is not what drives her. Anne does not appear to want humiliation, scandal, or open war. Her loyalty makes disclosure almost impossible. But that same loyalty could force her to speak if remaining silent allowed her mother's wishes to be rewritten. That is the hidden danger of royal jewels. They do not merely decorate. They can bless a marriage, raise a newcomer, soften a scandal, or announce that a wound has healed when bitterness still survives beneath the surface. And so the case remains closed. The tiara stays untouched while the family around it changes through death, succession, ambition, and resentment. Perhaps Anne has already won. By making the jewel too dangerous to wear, she may have stopped the transfer without ever publicly opposing it. But insiders believe another wearer has already been chosen. The palace may simply be waiting for Anne to step away from public life before opening the case again. When that moment comes, the tiara will not carry only diamonds. It will carry 10 years of silence, a daughter's promise, and a battle the monarchy tried to bury. Until that night arrives, the tiara remains exactly where Anne left it behind guarded doors, untouched and glittering, holding a secret powerful enough to turn a royal inheritance into a public reckoning.